start right at the beginning. I am very curious about how Dana's writing found its way into your hands. Can you talk a little bit about that, Nan?
Absolutely. Dana wrote a novel called Lightning Field, which was sent to me by Melanie Jackson, who's been Dana's agent since the beginning of time, and it came with a little extra recommendation, sort of two extra recommendations, one from Don DeLillo and one from Gordon Bush. And Melanie is enough to make a person wake up and read, and that helped. And then Dana's sentences were truly extraordinary, and unlike any that I'd read, and sort of outside of what we think of as gender in writing, very interested in language, very interested in sentences, the way they're constructed, and this LA world that was sort of made me think it was real, but absolutely out at some margin that I certainly couldn't have imagined.
So, Melanie sends the book in to Nan, and Nan is interested, and she contacts you. Do you have a date? What happened? How did you first meet? And what was your impression? And what made you decide? I'm sure that you must have had choices. And so how did you decide that Nan was the right editor for you? Was it recommendations of other people or just gut instinct?
Well, I was impressed by the other people she edits. Mm-hmm. And then I think after, we did have a conversation about the book before the decision was made, as I recall. And I think what's true with Lightning Field, what's true with all the books, is Nan has always had almost the same. You sort of secretly know what you need to fix, but you're not quite sure. And she would always get the same thing that I had doubts about. Nan would always. So with Lightning Field, it didn't change all that much, but she understood what I was trying to do right away. That was clear. And I do remember the first time we met. We had lunch near Simon & Schuster at Morel's, And I remember Nan said, I have worked in restaurants most of my life, and I was a wine buyer for a restaurant in Manhattan. So she took me to this wine place, and I ordered. I remember what I ordered some Sauvignon, 2 glasses of Sauvignon for us. And she said, "Oh, I'm so sick of Chardonnay. I'm so glad you ordered that, Dina." And it was really
remember that.
Yes. And then I also remember what else you said too. And Nan does this all the time. For me, this was once in a lifetime. She said, "What writers do you admire?" And I said, "David Foster Wallace." And you would just talk to someone else about David Foster Wallace, and you said, "I feel like I'm having a David Foster Wallace sandwich today." You remember that?
No. I don't know if I want to really imagine what a David Foster Wallace sandwich is.
Sorry. I do remember very much.
And what do you remember of that first meeting, Nan?
Not as much as Dana. I certainly don't remember. She was extremely well-read, and she was extremely smart. She knew exactly what she wanted to do with this novel. That's really all that I remember, and I liked her.
So
I can't do a whole lot. And it was in the days when one had wine at lunch. It was back in 1955.
Back in the 50s, yeah.
Not 3 martinis, but 1 glass of wine.
you said something that I think is so right about Dana's work, that it defies a kind of gender expectation, and also that the sentences, sentence by sentence, through all of her books, all of your books, the sentences are so carefully wrought. The books, I was actually rereading Eat the Document, and I was on the subway, and I was mouthing all the words, and the people in the subway were looking at me like I was insane. But it kind of, your writing calls for that, word by word, sentence by sentence. You feel a kind of rigorous choice is going on in a sense of how one sentence flows to another and how the words work. How do you edit someone like that where every word is so beautifully and carefully chosen then?
You honor the sentence, I think is all I can say. There, she's almost perfect, but she's not 100% perfect. Going back, I went through some editorial letters, and there were some, you start at the sentence and you come up and you start at the story and you go down, or at least that's the way I see the process. And there were some times when there was a scene missing in the books, or a scene sort of out of order in the books. But then there is just this kind of, there's some tics that writers have. So there are words that come over and over again. There are words that belong to that book. And I think maybe in Stone Arabia it was actually sort of, kind of, really, just a sort of sequence of, and maybe in Eat the Document it was caught himself, caught herself, and what I would call stage business, where you just get rid of all the excessive, unnecessary words, and then the sentences come into the spotlight and are exactly what they should be, but there's nothing in the way of them. There's sort of no weeds in the way, or no brambles. You just get the sentence.
What do you think of Nan's comment that when she read your writing that it defied, I'm not getting what she said exactly right, but it defied or was outside the kind of gender expectations? What do you think of that? What does it mean for you?
I think that what I hope that, I think that there's a kind, I guess that there's a kind of a idea, sort of, there's some ideas going on at that, as well as emotional things going on, and I think sometimes the cliche about fiction that women write is that it's going to be more sentimental, or it's going to be more emotional, or it's going to be more domestic. So I think that having it be a little bit idea-driven as well as, and language-driven as well as emotional and character-driven was the thing that made it seem not that sort of cliche of, I don't really know that cliche even exists, but whatever, the cliche about women's writing.
Yeah. And you've edited a lot of really amazingly wonderful women writers, so that cliche sort of falls apart when you look at the writers that you edit, right. Actually. But do you want to say anything else about that?
No, I think it is, I think the sentences, I think we're interested in what all of these books are about, the world that Dana enters and describes and imagines. But it is true that the sentence level is interesting, the language engagement is interesting. And I think, I'm not saying that that's not what we expect and should expect from women, but there is a kind of, the strength of the language and the focus on the language just seemed to me to be exceptional. And I don't mean to say that other female writers aren't capable of doing that too, but it is, I think there's an electricity there that I responded to immediately. And one of the, back to this sort of sentence, kind of going through files of letters, it made me really regret email, because I think one of the ways that editors, at least in the past, got to know how to edit someone, entered the language, was by actually getting into a correspondence and almost hearing the language and responding to the language, so that you almost, you internalize the language, and then you're not making stupid changes to a sentence because it's not the way you would write the sentence, or it's not the way someone else would write the sentence, that you really, you begin to, you just take on that language. And it was very easy to take it on when you were writing, 2-page letters, and you really sat down and heard the cadence of the writer, not just on the page of the novel, but in sort of in a dialogue. And I do think that I think that was a kind of, it was a guideline. It became a way of entering the writer's world that email simply doesn't accomplish in that way.
You don't think so? I mean, I definitely don't think so either. People don't have the same kind of way.
There are people who manage to write an email that sounds like them, but it's rare.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, you talked about working in two ways on the editorial process, coming up from the sentence and then coming sort of as a stage manager in a way, down from the macro. In the books, were there major changes? Were there things that you came in with an idea of an ending or a beginning or a large frame for the book, and then in discussion with Nan that shifted radically?
Yeah, that it did happen. In fact, when I think about the editing, I think that the macro level's more of what we've worked on than the sentence level, because I remember in each book that Nan asked for additional scenes. Light and Field, there was a scene with the brother, and she has she conceives of the novel as she's a great structural engineer of the novel, so she can sort of say that this needs to be balanced over here. We need to see when the brother comes to LA, we need that scene, and we need to document my original, and it was so funny because I almost know exactly what she's saying as she's saying it. Yes, I know that, but I thought I think with Eat the Document, I was very nervous about showing the bomb. I don't think I'm ruining this, right? The bomb that she plants, because I thought, I just thought it would be, I was terrified of being sort of corny or just sort of ruining it somehow. I had built up this tension, and I thought this is the time to look away. And so she persuaded me to try to write it, and I did, and it was right. I see when I wrote it that it was right, and we didn't change it at all. I mean, it was perfect in that sense for what we did. And then she said, oh, but you know what, we can't end there. We need Jason. We need to go back to Jason because it isn't about the bomb, is it? And okay, so we go back. So I wrote that scene. She didn't say, I want this to happen in the scene. She said, I need this person to get back to one more time. So that was really quite a big deal. That was really adding two scenes at the end of the book. But as I was writing them, they felt completely right. So it was no dispute. It was complete, we were working together. And for Stone Arabia, I originally started with this Chronicle, Nick's fake letter in the Chronicle, this sort of fake document. And I knew that wasn't the right place to start, but I couldn't figure it out, what to do. So, well, you can tell what you did.
Yeah.
So you kind of came upon it.
For those of you who haven't read this book, it once began with Nick's writing a letter as if he was Denise to Denise's daughter, Ada. And so you start with something that is sort of a trick, and it felt slightly out of character for Denise, who actually is this extraordinarily responsible, reliable person who doesn't pull any tricks on you. And to have this novel open with a kind of a trick, which was a long trick, because it was about 23 pages,
right,
seemed somehow out of character. But I also couldn't quite figure out how to fix it. And then we have this nice little process when we begin to present the book to the sales reps and marketing and everyone else. We have to give them 5 or 6 pages to read, and of course one tends to give them the beginning of the book because it's much easier that way. And I couldn't give them the beginning because it was this. It didn't feel true to the book to me. And then I found this little section that was about 5 pages that really is Denise speaking. And they were maybe pages 23 to 29, and we just moved them to the beginning. And then so Denise gets to own the book, and she gets to be straight. I mean, I would say that one thing that I think makes working with you easier, but makes some of these scene shifts more fluid is in every book there's an alternate kind of a narrative. There's Nick's chronicles, and there's Denise's Counter Chronicle, and there's Jason's journals underneath the document, and there are the odd sort of film scripty dialogues in Lightning Field. So you are interrupting the narrative often, and that means that you can sort of, you're shifting anyway. So it's not as dramatic as it sounds, because you're already in a kind of a shifting territory.
Yeah, and I think I was nervous about it because I thought, well, there's a coda, there's a sort of reverie at the end of this book, and I like starting with the letter and ending with this, two little things. But then she said, try it, just try it. So I tried it, because what, you can try these things, right? So I tried it, and then I liked it, and it is right to start with Denise, and also I realized it's a memory. So then now I had a memory in a memory, which also made me happy, because I just, I wanted that for this book, because the narrative doesn't really, the narrative doesn't really come to a close. So the formal structure comes to a close in a way that has to feel complete to me. So that worked, and it was so it was a great relief to have that suggestion to try it out and have it work. Yeah.
As you were describing your process, it sounded to me, Nan, almost like what I think of as in the theater, the dramaturgical process that goes on, where not an editorial process. But that may just be that I'm more familiar with the theater than I am with what an editor does.
I can't imagine doing the theater where there are 18 people around, or 6 people around, or how you ever. But you clearly have that experience.
But that idea of structuring and shifting scenes and moving and saying this doesn't build quite, and maybe there's another scene needed here, sounds like the primary way that you're working.
Yeah, and I think the reason why, I think that part of Nan's skill as an editor is that she always presents it, it's up to you. If you resist, she'll back off.
This is one tiny scene in a completely otherwise superbly constructed book. It's really not a huge.
It was, just moving it 20 pages, but it was also, but I mean, I'm just saying is that her suggestions feel to be truly suggestions. Mm-hmm. So I think it gives you the sense that I mean, Nan, and it's virtually all her editing is, she always says, it's your book, you decide what you want to do, here's this question I have, blah, blah, blah. And I think it allows you to have, so she doesn't, so I think that there's a kind of a chemistry that works for me with that, where I know she understands what the book's trying to be and what I'm trying to do, and she can give a suggestion. And there are sometimes when we've decided that when I convinced her, no, I don't think that will work for this or this reason, and she'll accept that as well. And so it kind of, so I think that's, I do think there's a lot of communication sort of chemistry that has to happen where you trust each other.
I know it's easy for me to say this as a reader after the fact, but for me, these books build, they feel a bit to me like an ongoing chronicle of America, that builds and builds over the course of the books, and that is very important to me as a reader. But I'm thinking about the process in publishing today, which doesn't really allow so very much for that kind of build over 2 or 3 or 4 books by a writer. Not only the building in popularity or the building in competence, but building a sort of an idea, the trappings of what the writer is becoming. That seems to me very different. I'm not seeing that happening a lot in publishing. What I see happening a lot in publishing is a really wonderful first novel and no contract for a second novel. So can you talk to me a little bit about, what makes you want to work with Dana, but what makes you hold on and just keep publishing and allowing for that slow build?
I want it to be faster. What we were saying earlier.
Looks pretty fast to me.
Dana is really, there's a certain kind of, it's just a build, but 10 years ago when we met, 11 years ago when we met. Dana was working in a restaurant. She had written her first novel. Her day job had nothing to do with what she was, nothing to do with her writing life, and she hadn't, won any awards. And she's now, I just read her author bio. It's incredibly impressive. So in these 10 years, she's become an extraordinary teacher. She's won a bunch of prizes, really a bunch of prizes, and is teaching in one of the best programs around. But it is true that we're an incredibly impatient industry at the moment, and this, where you publish your first novel, it gets incredible reviews from the very beginning, and sells modestly, and then the next book gets incredible reviews, even more incredible reviews, despite Dana saying, let me just write you right now before Michiko, destroys me. And that was that was right before the document came out. Michiko did not destroy her. And then, I get the next letter right before Stone Arabia comes out. Let me just write one more letter before Michiko. In any case, so we sold more copies of Eat the Document, and it got a National Book Award nomination. And then Stone Arabia comes out, and we get these extraordinary reviews, and we sell some more copies, and it's very gradual and a little slower than a person who's supposed to be patient, but is really impatient, such as myself. And I mean, I think she should be read by far more people in this country. And so by all means, everyone can start solving the problem right here by buying the book on your way out the door.
Look, I agree. I also think, though, that, I mean, you need, the readership has been building, but conceptually the books have been building too. The ideas in the frame for Stone Arabia is so ambitious. It is about so many things. It's about memory and conceptual art and music and at a certain time and how we understand who we are in the world and just so many things. Not that your other books weren't, but it seems to me there's a progression of the risks you're willing to take with a book. Can you speak a little bit to that?
It's funny because they all feel equally sort of risky, it's terrible risk. Terrifying risk, all of them. And I was just thinking that it also takes me a long time to write. I wish I could write more quickly, and it just living with it and feeling it and I imagine each time that it's going to be easier and quicker, and I know, and it doesn't seem to be the case. It seems to be that each one is each of these books was very hard for me to write. That's just, and took everything. There was nothing being held back. This was really the best I could do at that moment. You know what I mean? I was really going for broke for each one, to be honest. And I suppose that, I'm older, and so I hope that I know I can do more now than I could do before. Yeah. So, I do have, I am really trying to do everything each time, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And failing, and trying again, and trying again, and sometimes out of the things that you feel that you've missed comes something new that you then go to and you mess that up. But it just, that is a struggle that feels constant to me and doesn't seem to have ups and downs,
Mm-hmm. I think there are people in the room who don't understand what goes on within the publishing house once a book is ready to go. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that, Nan. How you have to be an advocate for the book, how you have to shepherd it through marketing and PR departments and build energy for it. Could you talk a little bit about what goes on when Dana's home writing with you, championing the book in the house?
There are salespeople who have to present the book to the bookstores who actually buy the book, and there are national sales representatives who sell to the remaining two bookstore chains in the whole universe. So now Barnes & Noble and Amazon, and then there are people who go out in the field and talk to independent booksellers, and we are very fortunate in having a lot of people on the staff and in those fields, in publicity and in marketing and in sales, who like to read. So, and feel it's sort of a privilege to be able to work on something, because not everything that is published in, not only by our own imprint, but by the other imprints whose books are being sold by these guys, not everything is, at the level of Dana Spiotta, and not everything is fiction, and there are people who really obviously came into this field because they love reading and they love books. So every single one of Dana's books has had champions, especially in the publicity department and on the part of Susan Moldau, who's the publisher of Scribner and has been a dedicated fan of Dana's from the very beginning. Part of the job of being the editor is trying to get a jacket on the book, and we've got all of these jackets up here because we've actually failed at publishing, at jacketing Dana over and over again. This was a jacket. Usually, this is a bound galley, as I'm sure you guys know. These are all bound galleys, and usually a bound galley and the jacket for the hardcover are the same. In Dana's case, not one of her bound galleys is the same as her hardcovers. So here was Lightning Field, and here's Lightning Field, and here was Eat the Document, and here was Eat the Document.
There's a third Eat the Document.
And a third, that would be the paperback. But it's very common to change from a hardcover to a paperback. It's not common to change from a bound gallery to a hardcover. This wasn't as radical a change. So I mean, the editor's job is to get the company to be excited about it, and the editor's job is to try to have some consistency of packaging, which I've completely failed at. And Dana's easy because there are people who love the work, and some of them have been there long enough to love more than one book even.